General elections will release the final list of candidates for 2022 soon. Thousands are expected to vie for just 8,000 positions, some 67 million expected to cast their votes. If they all vote, that'll be the biggest turnout in history. Setting aside all the drama among candidates, whoever succeeds President Duterte will inherit an economy crippled by a global health crisis in a country said to be the worst place to be during the pandemic, and politicians either busy forging alliances or changing teams, and the voting public divided, decided, undecided. This is the political landscape for May 2022. Good evening, I'm Pia Hontiveros. Welcome to your weekly political appointment fix, politics as usual. Our first guest tonight, sociologist Nicole Curato, joining us live from London in the United Kingdom. Hi, Nicole. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's begin with what happened today. PRRD, President Duterte withdrawing his senatorial bid, a surprising in a way turn of events. Pero at least, hindi ba, parang tinotohanan ng mag-ama na no two Dutertes will run for a national position, Nicole. What do you think?
Well, good evening, Pia, and thanks for that, right? And I think what happened today really is a reminder that even though we think that the 2022 presidential elections will be a different elections, I think the reality is the national race is simply just a continuation of politics as usual, right? I think the biggest change in this election is, of course, we have a labor rights activist running for president, but in many ways, this election is also a comeback election. So aside from President Duterte still playing his old games, we also can see the traditional political alliances taking place. So if anything, this election is not so different. It's an election of comebacks. President Arroyo, President Estrada forming a grand coalition to support the children of former presidents. So, Pia, our lives may have been transformed by the pandemic, but our political elites are behaving as if the pandemic never happened.
Politics and elections as usual, sadly. But, it's not really surprising also, no, Nicole, in the sense that he joined the presidential race in 2015 and that threw off a lot of people. Not very many people expected that, no, when he subbed for Martin Dino. So it's not like hindi tayo sanay sa kanya, right?
Yes, absolutely. Although I think what's fascinating about the 2016 race when President Duterte ran for office is he portrayed himself as a crisis president. So in many ways, my own field research, I was observing communities in Tacloban, surviving Typhoon Yolanda, and many of them look to President Duterte as exactly the president that we need to address crises like mega disasters. And I think what's fascinating in this elections is parang hindi na tuloy yung ganong klaseng personality ni President Duterte of being able to assert that you need someone who can be a crisis leader. And I think we can see that with many candidates. A lot of them are talking about unity or talking about governance, but the emphasis on crisis, parang hindi nag-stick yung ganong klaseng legacy ni President Duterte when he was still running in 2016.
Crisis management, something that should have come to the fore because, we are in a crisis, this pandemic. But let's talk about, we don't have Bongo anymore in the mix, no, for the presidential race. What will this mean for that race? But let's zero in because, a week or two ago, I had this as a topic, no, yung presidential anointments and what they mean. And both Ronnie Puno and Maluti Kia were talking about how important it is na hindi lang yung anointing, the one who is anointing ang popular, pero pati yung ina-anoint niya, no? So now the question is, if Bongo isn't running, who is President Duterte going to be backing this time around? Because PDP Laban and PDDS, yung kanilang partido, wala namang standard bearer.
Yes, actually, yun din yung fascinating because there will be no candidate who will consistently defend the legacy of the Duterte administration. So it also reminds us of the power of a seemingly strong president in the form of President Duterte. It can actually be diminished towards the end of his term. So unlike 2016, where we had someone like Mar Rojas defending the Aquino administration and promising to continue the legacy of the Aquino administration, I think with Bongo out of the race, we'll wonder to what extent will these candidates who are sort of associated to President Duterte, to what extent will they defend the policy? Kasi parang so far we have people like Isko Moreno, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who will say there are some good things about this administration, but will not really defend it the way Maro has defended the Aquino administration. So to me, that will be fascinating.
Yeah.
To what extent will the Duterte legacy be defended in this race?
Would it be strange if, or weird even, if President Duterte would choose Bongbong Marcos, for example, to anoint or to support, given that he had attacked him as a weak leader among many other things?
It will definitely be weird, but I think by now we are used to that weirdness.
Okay. And since we don't have any more Rodrigo Duterte on the ballot for the senatorial race, what is this going to mean for the senatorial race?
You know, I would love to say that this opens up the senatorial slate to more progressive and new candidates, fresh voices. But unfortunately, Pia, that is not the case, right? So if we look at the front runners in the Senate, these are still old names. So even if President Duterte drops out of the race, even if he's not a viable or he's not a contender anymore, it's not as if him dropping out will open up space for new voices. If anything, it will be the same Senate composition. And to that extent, we can't really expect that much change.
Back to the presidential race now, BBM, Bongbong Marcos, doing very well in pre-campaign surveys. And, many questions about paano pa kaya pag pagkampanya na, no? How is he going to fare in the surveys during the campaign? And bakit kaya, no? Is there this real nostalgia for the Marcos years? Is there democracy fatigue? Is this going to be a referendum on EDSA 1986?
I would love to say that it is, but actually when we study how ordinary Filipinos view this on the ground, really the perspective of this election is very practical. Which candidate will give us jobs next time? And this is also the reason why the Marcos appeal is there, because of course, there's a lot of discussion on historical revisionism, but I think what is equally worth monitoring here is the gray area. Like, for example, when they talk about the achievements of the Marcos administration during the dictatorship and they want to replicate that now, in a way, BBM establishes the track record of his family for the Masagana program or the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine. But Pia, if we observe how they construct that argument, doon medyo nagiging tricky. So for example, they will claim that the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine was created by an executive order in 1981. That's not necessarily a lie, but it's also not accurate because it's the Japanese government that paid for that laboratory. Yeah. So kaya napaka-exciting ng story, the way BBM and his team construct the story, is because it's not entirely unfounded, but they try to establish that track record to make a case. And I think that is how they bridge the claim na eto yung legacy ng Marcos administration, we can replicate it today. Yeah. And I think this is where vigilance really has to be heightened because we're talking about disinformation a lot, but also we have to be careful with how these narratives are constructed because these narratives have an appeal. Yeah,
a penchant for attributing what happens during an administration to that administration, but hindi lang naman yan sa Marcos, lahat naman natin ng administration. Anyway, Nicole, thank you very much.
Is so normal, right?
Thanks for being with us in this first part of the show. We're going to speak to you later on. We'll be back after a quick break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This is Politics as Usual. Our second guest, COMELEC spokesperson James Jimenez. Good evening. Sir, ang daming ganap ngayon sa COMELEC. Hindi lang yung announcement nyo that you're moving things back a bit, you're recalibrating the schedule. Of course, as we all know and saw, President Duterte withdrawing his candidacy for certificate of candidacy for senator, and Bongo
Senator.
formalizing that withdrawal of his candidacy for the presidency. But before that, so James, itong recalibrated schedule, no, what will this mean in terms of finalizing and printing the ballots? Mag-move back din ba yon?
Yeah, yung ballots, we don't expect that to move, because exactly that we're moving the deadline for releasing the official list of candidates. What's happening is basically we're loading all of these names into our system already, but we will be able to edit out the names that will be eventually removed kasi nakasuhan sila for nuisance. So, yung process ng paghahanda for ballot printing, it's still ongoing.
Okay.
It's just that the official list isn't released yet. So, if you can imagine it, I don't know. If you can imagine it, it's basically we're putting in all of the names right now, so that we're not waiting for a final list. We're just putting in all of the names, and then as we get closer to printing day, nababawasan yan, right? As these decisions come out. So that way, we're still gonna make the timetable for ballot printing.
When is printing day?
We're expecting to start printing by January 15.
Okay. Which disqualification cases were you referring to? Like which particular nuisance candidate for what position? President, VP, senator?
Well, for
Party
the most
list?
part, it's for presidential candidates. No, we have a lot of cases against presidential aspirants because obviously, well, we have 97 presidential aspirants.
Yeah.
So a majority of them have nuisance cases filed against them.
Yeah. Well, Bongbong Marcos himself has quite a bit of a number of cases on his hands.
That's right.
Can you look into your crystal ball and tell us what's going to happen there? No, you can't.
Well, one particular case that we're, I think, closing in on in terms of a decision would be the very first one, where you have a cancellation of COC case filed against him. We're really expecting movement on that very soon because the preliminary conference has been held. And if I'm not mistaken, the parties would have submitted their written memoranda, if not yet, then very soon. This means that it will be submitted for resolution fairly quickly. As for the rest, I guess there are still some cases pending in the other division. So the first case was in the second division. So there's another case in the first division. So they're still talking about the possibility of consolidation. Of course, no clear indications yet that there will be any consolidation. So that might take some time.
Is it possible that a
But
decision, any of those cases can come out before Christmas? Before Christmas Day, for example, or before the New Year?
Well, I don't know that it's going to be something that's going to happen, right? We're going to release a decision on Christmas Day or before Christmas. Again, considering the issues involved. But I just like to point out that some of these cases are disqualification cases,
Yes.
right? So disqualification cases normally do take some time. It's the cancellation cases that if anything is going to come out before Christmas, that would be it, no? The cancellation cases,
Oh,
because
kasi,
those
yeah.
are fairly easy to resolve.
Yeah, printing day for the ballots, January 15. So even if a decision in any DQ case comes out after that and someone's name has to be removed from the ballot, then how are you going to do that?
Well, if the ballots are starting printing and the disqualification case is resolved and it's adverse, then the name really stays on the ballot. It's just that the votes that are given to that particular name would be considered stray votes. So again, the ideal situation is that everything that needs to be removed should be removed before January 15. But again, this does not always happen.
97 candidates for president, like you said, minus what, 90 or 91? And therefore, only 7 or 6 will remain.
I think right now we're about, in the ballpark of around 15 candidates left standing. So
15.
that
Okay.
might still be a huge number of candidates for president.
Wow. And senators, you only have 12 seats up for grabs, 12 seats, no? So ilan ang maglalaban-laban?
Well,
many
mukhang
candidates
mga 50, no? Around 50 is the number that we're probably closing in on.
When you talk about the senatorial race, I remember I used to cover NAMFREL every election, and especially nung manual pa ang elections natin, which is a long time ago. I'm not sure that this generation of young people remember that. Pero at that time, pinag-usapan doon yung fill-up rate because syempre dahil manual ang pag-fill up ng balota, talagang kailangan isulat mo yung pangalan. At the time,
That's right.
fill-up rate is 6 to 8 to 9 out of 12. Is there any way that we will be able to, what was it in 2010 and 2016, and what are we looking at for 2022? Is there some way that we can find out?
Well, mas mataas ang fill-up rates with automated elections, right? In fact, one of the dangers of automated elections is overvoting. People tend to be, shade happy. So that's actually the bigger challenge.
Yeah.
But in terms of fill-up rate, yeah, we've seen an increase in fill-up rate because it's a little easier to do that with automated ballots.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this segment, but my last question is, President Duterte saying, kayo sa COMELEC, kayong in charge. Can you do anything about all these motorcades, gatherings, sorties, rallies of, all these candidates? Because precisely, we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Right. Well, in fact, naglabas na kami ng campaign guidelines. We've already released campaign guidelines. The problem, Pia, is that these campaign guidelines will not take effect until the start of the campaign period,
Right,
which means
right.
right now, when it's still not the campaign period, the authority to really prevent these things from happening lies with someone else.
So in other words, it is a free-for-all at the moment until the campaign begins in February, like you said. James Jimenez, thank you very much. You're going to join us in the last part of the show together with Nicole Curato. More from our guests when we return. This is Politics as Usual. We're on our final stretch here in Politics as Usual. Here with us, COMELEC spokesperson James Jimenez and sociologist Nicole Curato. I wanted to ask the both of you first about this. We don't vote for a tandem. No, we cannot elect, the president, the standard bearer, and his or her running mate together. And usually, what happens is that there are different permutations, combinations. As 2016 showed us, it was a Digong and Lenny result. We had Noy B or Aquino and Binay in 2010. James, you first. Do we have data in 2010 and 2016? Ano yung mga different combinations, permutations? Meron bang ganon?
I don't remember anymore, but if I remember correctly, the actual candidate team-ups were really not the most popular team-ups anyway. And in fact, there were different combinations that were pretty surprising. Example, Aquino Binay, right? People didn't really see that coming. And certainly ngayon, yung Duterte Robredo, again, this was a surprise result. So I guess this is how it turns out when you have a system that allows you to vote president and vice president separately. Yeah. It's not the most logical scheme, I think, especially given our past experience.
Nicole Curato, do we have a guess as to how people will be voting this time around itong 2022? Ano kaya mga combination nila? Or will people go for like Lenny Kiko halimbawa for the kakampings as they call themselves and for all the other tandems?
Yes, I agree. We have to be ready to be surprised. But I think to answer your question, one fascinating data we have from the 2016 election was how different the OFW vote was when it comes to the permutation of the president-vice president race. So obviously in the in the Philippines, it's a Duterte-Robredo tandem. But for the OFW vote, it was actually a Duterte and Marcos tandem. In fact, Vice President Robredo was the third in that race. So I think this is why a lot of strategists and observers are thinking about the niche voters that will allow them to create that combination that they really want to get at the end of the elections. And of course, local governments also matter here, di ba? Kasi hindi naman consistent na tandem din yung pinupush ng machineries ng local government. So there's still a lot of wait and see happening at the moment.
2 points there. No, all politics is local, like we always say. At the same time, yung OFW vote, like you said, Nicole, for 2016, Duterte, Marcos. And now, there's a lot of talk about BBM being very strong daw sa OFW vote. right?
That is hard. That is not surprising, and I think this also sends a signal to the Robredo campaign because they ranked third in the 2016 elections. Alan Peter Cayetano was even ahead of VP Robredo in that race.
Of course, very different 2016 and 2022. Your final words. I wanted to ask you to the both of you to talk about what is the campaign likely to look like, not just given the pandemic, but how politics is so strange nowadays, and also election day itself. Let's begin with Nicole. You first, Nicole Curato.
I think I will appeal more to the voters like myself. I think this election is the fight for our lives. At stake is how many of us will survive in the coming years. I don't really mean to be dramatic, Pia, but this pandemic demonstrates that government policy will directly affect who lives or who dies, right? If you think about the case of Michelle Silvertino, the woman who died under the bridge because of a lockdown policy in Manila, that is an effect of a direct government policy. If we think about mega disasters like Ondoy and Yolanda, that will happen more in the coming years. So I'm not being dramatic when I say that the next elections will really decide how we will live or die as a nation. So I guess this is really just an appeal for all of us to take this seriously.
Pandemics and climate change, two interlocking concerns, if you will. James Jimenez?
Yeah, I totally agree with Nicole. Sadly, I have a very dim view of our prospects right now. It's been quite a while since people have announced their candidacies, and there have been very few attempts to really articulate a plan out of this mess that we're in. I don't see, for example, I don't see any significant platforms around climate change or even climate emergencies. So I think that the candidates have to step up in terms of letting the public know what their policies would be, what their plans are, and what it will cost the Filipino down the line. I think it's very important, as Nicole said, for Filipinos to really think about who they're going to vote for because it's very, very consequential. But the candidates also have to give us something to choose from, not just the fandoms that we're seeing at war right now.
Fandoms, huh? Thank you so much for being with us tonight. COMELEC, Commission on Election spokesperson James Jimenez, salamat James, and sociologist Nicole Curato joining us from London in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much, Nicole. We've been told before, don't talk politics at the dinner table or at a family reunion or in Viber groups and risk digital warfare. But we can talk about it here at this table on this show, your weekly political appointment fix, politics as usual. I'm Pia Hontiveros. See you back here next Tuesday, 8:30 p.m.